How many of those are there? I know you don't know the days on the top of your head, but how many of those per year?
Testing dates?
Yeah.
I think that ACT, SAT, I think they have between 4 and 6 a year each, so they have roughly 8 to 12 depending. And it's funny, some individuals do much better on an ACT than they do an SAT, or vice versa. So there's sometimes you'll see someone who scores on an ACT that will look at them and go, you know what, go take the SAT, go try that one, see how you do on that. For whatever reason, I can't explain it. There's probably an academic logic behind it, but for some reason, yeah. Down here in the South, ACT is the predominant test that we see through the eligibility center. But I grew up in the Northeast. In the Northeast, the SAT is the predominant test. In fact, when I first went to the NCAA, I didn't know what the ACT was, because it's just not something that's really given up there. It's just, and so, but they both predict pretty much the same thing. Okay. Now I'll tell you, there's been a big discussion over the last 7 to 8 years about what's the best predictor. I can't tell you what the best predictor is. What we think is the best predictor is grade point average. If someone has a strong grade point average in high school, they're likely to succeed in college. Okay? But that's not always the case, because sometimes there's grade inflation. And so what you saw is when that sliding scale came out, if you just think about it logically, it makes sense. Well, the higher the grade point average I have, the lower my test score can be. So you get people focusing more on their grade point average now, because that becomes critical for you, maybe even so. Where before, you might have gone test, did great. Well, now you still got to figure out where's my test figure into. If I hit the cut scores before, I was okay. Now I may have some more work to do. So we use the grade point average as a better predictor, but that's not always the case. Just because you're a 4.0 student or 3.8 student in high school does not mean you're going to succeed in college. I mean, if you just look at the graduation rates at Auburn, not for athletes, for the general student population, it's roughly about 60%. So when you think about it, is that our incoming kids who are coming in, they all predict well, but for some reason something happens between the time they get here and before they graduate that happens. Life happens, you know. It just is, but we're utilizing these as predictors. What are the things that are going to most likely cause someone to be eligible at a collegiate institution? That's what we're getting at here, okay? All right, core course time limitations. So we've talked about the core courses, talked about grade point average, we talked about testing. There's actually a limitation in when you take these core courses, okay? And again, I'm going to talk general rules, because there's an exception to just about every rule at the NCAA. All right, just so we're clear, because you're probably going to say, but I remember somebody, and that's true. Someone probably is going to be an exception to what I'm about to say. The general rule is your first 8 semesters here in the United States, okay? Talks about 9th through 12th grades, 8 semesters. Basically, and it's once we enroll in high school. So Steve and I go to high school together, okay? We enroll our freshman year, we're there our freshman year. Steve goes 8 semesters and graduates. We're going to use all of those 8 semesters for Steve. We're going to see if he has his core courses, God bless you. If he has his core courses, then he's eligible, okay? Contrast that. I go into 9th grade with Steve, okay? I repeat the 9th grade. I then get to the 10th grade. I get to the 11th grade. I repeat the 11th grade. And then I get to 12th grade. They're going to use my first 8 semesters in determining whether or not I'm a qualifier or not. That was a change, and that's a significant change, okay? Now, again, there's exceptions to that rule. You have people with learning disabilities, which are now being called educational impacting disabilities, which you'll hear as LD or learning disabilities. They have some different rules. So there are some different time constraints, okay? You also have in that second bullet point, a lot of international, many countries have their own educational system. And we have student athletes from all over the world coming to the NCAA and specifically coming to Auburn. And so there's different standards there, okay? That's very important for us to know. If you're coming from England, we're going to look at the United Kingdom system to determine if they follow that traditional path. Great example is we had an individual here, very good at what they were doing. They were so good, in fact, their country decided to move them out of their country to a warmer weather country to be able to train while they're still in high school. Well, they went from one country to the other country. The Olympic Committee had them do this. Went from one country to another country. That second country's academic path was different. It was a year longer. This person goes into that academic country, graduates, gets to Auburn, and we have to charge that individual a season of competition, and they're ineligible for a year here because back in the United Kingdom, they would have graduated a year earlier. Now, does that necessarily make sense? No. But at the same time, when you look at all the different scenarios that the NCAA deals with, you start realizing there's a rational relationship as to why they do that. Okay? So there's always going, now again, we'll file waivers for that type of individual and argue all those circumstances, and those types of waivers, many do get granted. But at first, you got to look at the country, and here in the United States it's the first 8 semesters. Okay? Any questions about that? That top slide really gets it, that deviating the normal educational path. We talked about that already. Okay, so we got all the way to, you've graduated high school, you've got your 16 core courses, you have your grade point average, you have your test score, you did it within your first 8 semesters. Congratulations, you're now considered a qualifier in the NCAA standards. What a qualifier means is that you can practice, you can compete, and you can receive athletics aid in your first year at an NCAA institution. Okay? Well, by default, if you're not a qualifier, you become then a non-qualifier. And a non-qualifier is just someone who doesn't meet the qualifier standards. If you're a non-qualifier, you cannot practice, you cannot compete, and you cannot receive athletically related financial aid during your first year. Okay, so you're either a qualifier or a non. Those that have been around for a while may have heard of a terminology called partial qualifier. That terminology went away about 5-6 years ago. We were just qualifier and non-qualifier, but I point that out to you because it's starting to come back in a little different terminology as we move forward. I'll explain it to you. Okay, so turn the page. We have some new legislation that the NCAA just started. I'm going to have Scott come up and talk about it. Hey, what I'm about to explain to you, I have to tell you, there is still so much that we don't know how this is going to apply. That you're going to ask me questions and I'm probably going to tell you, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to give you the effective date. The effective date is not for student athletes who are entering on or after August 1st of 2015. It's delayed effective date. But that means freshmen in high school this year are going to have this standard applied to them. Why is that important? Because you're going to see very quickly that the terminology of a qualifier has significantly changed. And what you can do or can't do if you are or not a qualifier has significantly changed. So we are in a whole new world order. It is going to be very, very different come August 1st of 2015. Remember what I said too. Our coaches can't get at these kids until really the end of their junior year. So who's advising these kids in their freshman, sophomore, and junior year? It becomes critically important for us to get this information out, to get it to guidance counselors, to high school associations and principals, to make sure, to talk about it at our camps, to make sure that prospective student athletes, especially the freshmen, understand the new requirements. The difficult part is we're still trying to figure them out ourselves. And so we're going to work through it with the coaches. But so I'm in the middle slide on that page 5 there. Basically what this new legislation does is it changed that sliding scale, that indexing for a qualifier that I talked to you about. It basically moves everything up by a half point in the grade point average. So before, where I said that if you had a 3.550 or above, you needed a 400 on your SAT to be a qualifier, okay? On your SAT to be a qualifier. Now you need a 4.0. And then you just slide it down. So the next one would be, if you had a 410, you need the 3.995. I mean, it's just everything's gone up a half a point. You can see just there alone, you can see that's a huge increase in academic requirements. Because you may have a 3, it's probably not going to affect the person with a 355, let's be honest. But if you're a 2.4 person and you have a grade point and a test score of about a 19 or a 20, you probably have some work to do now, which is different than before. Well, before they probably would have been a qualifier. Now they need another half point in their grade point average. In their 4th year, it becomes difficult that's when we first start recruiting them. That means they got to book it really hard in their 4th year. Okay, so that's huge for us.